Sure. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. And, it's great to see so many people here from the Department of Education and the education community throughout Vermont. Folks who are working so hard from early childhood education to higher education, workforce retraining. I see a few of you. President of CCB is here. Doing a great job. Thanks you all for joining us. And I want to give a special welcome to the next Secretary of Education of the state of Vermont, Rebecca Holcombe, who I'm extraordinarily proud to introduce to you today, and has been through a long process, but we are thrilled to announce that Rebecca Holcombe will be the next Secretary of the Department of Education. With her today is her beautiful family, her husband, James Bamla, who might be familiar to some of you. I think he might have been in the press corps in Vermont at some point or another, but he's reformed. Their beautiful children, Johanna, who's in 8th grade, and Daniel, who's in 6th. Thanks so much for joining us. We know you're as proud of your mom as we are. As you know, Rebecca will be placing Secretary Bill II. I want to start by thanking the Secretary for his extraordinary service to this great state. He came in as a commissioner, became the first Secretary, and did a great job taking a good education system in Vermont and making it even better. So I'm grateful to him. As I know is my chair of the State Board of Education, Stephen Morris. Thank you so much for joining us today. Stephen will say a word in just a second. Rebecca comes to us from Norwich, Vermont, where she and her family live. She's currently the director of the Dartmouth Teaching Education Program in Hanover, which we're going to be taking from New Hampshire soon with the help of Green Mountain Boys. She was director of academics during the formation of the Rivendell School District, for which 4 small towns joined to form one K-12 interstate school district. And I say anyone who can bring together 4 communities to consolidate and create one school with people coming out happy is going to make a great secretary. She's also been principal at Fairley School for grades K through 8, and a curriculum coordinator, as well as a social studies and science teacher at the Francis Richmond School in Hanover. Most importantly, what struck me about our new secretary, Rebecca Holcombe, is that whenever I asked her a question about her vision for education, the fact that it's our most important obligation in a democratic society, and the thing that will make the difference in whether Vermont has a good and bright jobs future or whether we don't. Every time when I asked her her philosophy, number 1, it matched mine, but number 2, it always came back to the kids. And that's why I think I'm convinced that she is going to be such a great secretary. She's a collaborator. She works together. She listens well. She has extraordinary background in education. But most importantly, she understands that from early childhood education to higher education to workforce retraining, we can continue to make Vermont the very best public education system in the country and work together with our partners in higher ed to make that partnership even stronger. So I want to turn it over now to the chair of the Board of Education. I first want to thank him and his hardworking colleagues. You might want to refresh your memory, but there was a legislative debate a few years ago. The secretary, as you know, came under the governor's office for the first time in Vermont history. There was some trepidation about that transformation. I've got to tell you, from my perspective as governor, our partnership with the State Board of Education has been nothing short of stellar. All of the terrible things that were said that might happen have not. We work very closely together. We share a vision together. We wouldn't have had to come up with such a great secretary had we not worked hand in hand. And I can't tell you how grateful I am to the chair, Stephen Morris, for helping to make that happen.
Thank you, Governor. That's exactly where I want to start, is that I wanted to remind everyone that we're in this transition for the last 2 years, where the governor's office has assumed responsibility for managing the state agency of education while the board continues to set policy. A lot of people had questions about that legislation when it was passed, but I got to tell you that the transition is going very well. The governor's office and the board are working well together, and if anything, this appointment and process demonstrates that and is a good example of just how well the two bodies have worked together. Before I comment on the selection of the new secretary, I too want to commend Secretary Beliseca for his leadership in the transition, and look forward to working with him as he continues before the new secretary fully takes her responsibilities. In this process, the board submitted 3 well-qualified candidates, and we're pleased that the governor has picked Rebecca Holcombe, and we're confident that she will serve all of Vermont's educational needs. I went back this morning and looked at her application, and I remember, I think, what particularly grabbed my attention at that time as it did this morning. In her application letter, here's a quote from it: "We should not make every child college ready, but rather innovation ready." And I think that demonstrates very clearly the stage of where the Vermont education system is at, and I think that will position the state of Vermont very well under Rebecca's leadership to make Vermont's educational system the best in the United States of America. It's a pleasure to be here today, Governor, and thank you for including me, and thank you for all your hard work in this process.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Now, without further ado, it's a real pleasure to turn over to you, the next Secretary of Education, Rebecca Holcombe. Welcome aboard. Looking forward to working.
First of all, I want to really thank the governor and the state board for this opportunity to work on behalf of the children of Vermont and for having the confidence in me and giving me this opportunity. I've had a multitude of experiences. I've worked as a teacher, I've worked as a principal, I've worked in curriculum, I've worked at the college level preparing teachers to take on this incredibly challenging task. But I want to say first and foremost that this isn't about me, this is about us. This is about bringing together all the people in our community who care about education to sit down at the table and work together to find good solutions to the kinds of challenges we face in schools. I look forward. I've already had some contact with people in the Agency of Education. I've been so pleased and honored by the way they've reached out and offered to help with the transition. I look forward to meeting everyone else at the agency and beginning that work, to looking at partners at the Vermont Principals Association, the Vermont School Board Association, the superintendents, working with educators in the field and the NEA. I believe that all together we really can create new opportunities for children. You know, we've lived in Vermont for 10, 12 years, and then we had to move away for professional opportunities. But we spent the entire time we were away looking to figure out how we could get back and put our kids back in Vermont schools. It's really important to understand what a treasure we have here, and I look forward to preserving that and doing my best to move up forward. I also look forward to supporting and furthering the governor's priorities, including early childhood education. We know that's one of the few things that really does work to close the achievement gap and create equal opportunities for all children. I'm impressed by the intention that's been placed both by the governor and by the state board on the individualized learning experiences, and look forward to trying to figure out ways to make that a reality in the classroom. Many good teachers are already doing that. We can take that to the next level and figure out how to make it work for our kids. And finally, I look forward to taking advantage of technology to support children's learning. We know that in the future, if kids don't know how to deal with unstructured problems, how to deal with novel situations, and how to analyze and synthesize information, there won't be a job for them. So one of the things that we can do is leverage the power of technology to reach people who are in isolated rural contexts and provide every child with the kinds of opportunities to develop those skills so that they can be successful in the 21st century. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Governor, for this opportunity.
Thank you. Fired up. That's the end of our Dr. Pong show.
You studied Act 60 at one point?
I did. I wrote a case study.
Yeah, can you talk about your findings?
It was actually, I wrote a case study for the Harvard Graduate School of Education on school finance reform. I have to say that I think Vermont has the most progressive and probably the most exciting education finance formula in the nation. I don't think it's perfect. I don't think there is a perfect school finance formula, but I do think that with Act 68 and with the equity that we have, we are closer to having the best system of school finance in the country.
What are some of the shortcomings in Act 68 now, and are there any mechanisms that you've identified that can be used to fix it?
You know, I'm just starting. I don't want to get into these. What I can tell you is that schooling, parents, voters, taxpayers are approving budgets. We want good things for our children. I think that we still need to look at better ways to finance it. I think the reality is when people approve budgets, it's because they want the things they're voting for. So I don't think there's an easy answer to that.
Did you all talk about funding reforms in your conversations about this position?
You know, we didn't talk about funding reforms. We talked about our vision for education and how we transform a system that has so many demands on it now that weren't even there when I was a kid in school. And that's really, I think, where we should be putting our energy. Look, what has changed is that when I graduated from high school, in this state, you could get a job and do well with a high school degree. That's no longer true. So we know that we have to move more kids beyond high school, more low-income kids beyond high school to succeed, and those are the kind of things that we focus on. How do we accomplish those goals?
School consolidation has been a topic of discussion quite a lot in recent years, and I'm wondering what you think about. Does Vermont need to move more in that direction, or is that something that is not really going to work here because of the rural nature of the long transportation commutes and et cetera?
Are you asking me or the next secretary?
I'm asking both of you, but I'll start with the next secretary.
I'll speak from my experience in Rivendell, which was a consolidation. Rivendell worked because we had very, very high levels of public participation, and there was something in it for everybody who was at the table. And the new district was approved by 80% voters. It was a solution that was generated through a long period of intense conversation, and people figured out a way to make it work so that the outcomes for kids in every single town involved were better at the end of that. Whether that experience is a model for other towns, I think is something other towns have to do.
So should it be more of a town-driven thing, or should the state have a stronger role in trying to urge, create incentives, or otherwise maybe eventually require some of the districts to combine?
Steve?
As you probably know, the legislature in recent years has passed two major pieces of legislation on consolidation, Act 153 and 156. And it makes it very clear that it's a voluntary process. It provides some funding to accomplish this and some reduction in tax rates if they move ahead. I believe there's only, it's called the Regional Educational District. I believe there's only been one that's gone through. At the state board meeting just earlier this week, I'm proud to say that we passed our second one, which was very controversial, in the Wyndham Central School District in southern Vermont. It happens to be my school district, so I know it well. But the board is certainly taking the position that it needs to be voluntary. I think we encourage it. We think the legislation does that. It's a bit of a mystery why more school districts haven't taken it up. But it's obviously, I'm a native Vermonter as well, along with the governor, and we certainly know that that's not going to work if it's a forced consolidation. But we certainly encourage schools to take a serious look at it.
The legislature,
Just to finish that question, all three of us agree that if you want to see a real mess, ask Montpelier to consolidate your school.
the legislature looked at a sort of middle ground of removing financial incentives for a small school grants. I mean, do you think, I guess this is a question for the governor and the incoming secretary, do you think those sorts of approaches where you're not forcing schools to consolidate, but you're removing what some people would see as incentives for them to stay small, is that an effective approach that you support?
You know, one of the problems with this conversation is that what is true for one school is not true for the other school. And I generally do not buy into the logic that small schools necessarily cost more to run than big schools. So, having said that, this really is a question where, in my judgment, local control works. Local communities know their schools. They know those that have gotten so small that they no longer make sense. They know those that are small and make sense. And we should have a funding formula in place that gives them the resources to have those conversations, which is exactly what we've done. You want to add it?
I would second that, and I would say that the research literature supports that as well. It's not clear that consolidation does reduce costs. That said, I think that there are opportunities for us to work to ensure quality for costs, and also to look at collaboration to reduce costs.
And that may be why we're going to be such a great team. I applied by the seat of my pants. Rebecca actually reads the research.
Are there places where it is appropriate for mandates or requirements to come down from on high, from your office, to every school in the state saying, you must do this, you have to do this?
Well, we do that. We require every child to go to school.
Right. But areas where you don't right now, where you would like to, I mean, it sounds like for school consolidation, you want to leave that to local control. Are there areas that you want to see reforms that you would require schools to undertake?
I think we're coming through an era of governance through accountability, and what we've seen is it doesn't work. We're trying to do for schools what needs to be done through professionalism, through development support of teachers, and through working closely with local communities to find solutions that work. The question in education isn't what works, it's what works in this context of these people. And so to have mandates come down from above, or anyone can require anything, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen on the ground the way we'd like it to. Effective solutions are ones that are developed with the people who are actually implementing
I don't see you. I'm sure committee on it. I'm sure.
The governance by accountability didn't work. Define that. I'm not sure what that refers to.
We've had, under No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top, we've had very strict requirements for demonstrating and assessing students. We've had penalties and consequences for students and for schools, and in many places for individual teachers, based on student performance. While we've seen state scores going up, we haven't seen sort of corresponding improvements in learning demonstrated by NAEP and other scores. I think what I would hope to see is a focus on how do we support communities and schools and teachers to build their capacity to educate children better, rather than just persistently asking, do they measure up? If we want to see gains and improvements in learning, we need to look not just on how well we're doing, but on how we actually help students get better.
And do you have any ideas for particular curriculum changes you'd like to see to get Vermont students better prepared for life in the 21st century?
I think the answers I'd give are general, because I think that's too premature. I haven't worked with the teachers, I haven't consulted with the various stakeholders in this game. What I can say is I think the evidence is clear, as the governor said earlier. If students aren't able to cope with ill-structured problems, if they aren't able to to analyze information and make sense of it and deal with unstructured, unpredictable situations, those are the skills that can't be done by computers. When you look at how information technology is transforming the workforce, our students need to be able to do those things, and our schools need to prepare them to do those things. How we do that, that's something that has to be developed in conversations with teachers.
How does that approach vary from college readiness? How does innovation readiness differ from college readiness?
In some senses, they're similar. It's just allowing students to have different choices based on what their personal goals are.
Well, it sounds like your application made a distinction between the two, though.
Innovation ready. Someone who's innovation ready can go to college, or they can choose to sit in their garage and develop the next computer.
Yeah, but a college ready student can choose to sit in their garage. So how did the two differ?
What we're saying is that all students need to have those opportunities. And I think the governor's emphasis on early childhood, some of the discussions we've had about extending the school year or creating study year opportunities for some children, these are things that we think will help bring all children to that level. So all children have that choice. It shouldn't just be a choice for the people who traditionally think of it college.
Did you attend Lincoln State College?
I am very proud to say that, that after I was a teacher for a while, I pursued certification as a principal. And to do that, I took coursework at Linden State College. And I really appreciate and I understand the critical role that Linden State plays in the Northeast Kingdom in particular in creating opportunities for people to move out of the classroom and work with the broader school context. So I'm very grateful to Linden.
Hope you come to more press conference.
Yeah, it was a good question. I have a slightly off-topic question to ask you. Governor, you took part in the Marijuana Policy Project's fundraising call today, is that correct?
Yes.
Can you tell me what you told their fundraisers, what their donors?
Yeah.
What the message was to them?
Sure. I told them really, but nothing different than what I've told you all in the last, whenever you've asked me these questions. There was no new ground to turn.
Can you give us like a?
Sure. I explained to them that when I came on as governor 2.5 years ago, I felt that our policies, our drug policies, were misguided, that we were spending resources prosecuting small amounts of marijuana, and we were losing the battle against heroin and other opiates. I continue to believe that. I think the biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges that Vermont faces right now, is the unrelenting growth in heroin and opiate addiction. And it's destroying our communities, destroying our families, destroying too many Vermonters. So I recounted for them what you all already know, that proud of the fact that we have leadership decriminalized small amounts of marijuana, opened up dispensaries so those who need medical marijuana to meet their medical needs no longer have to go buy it from a drug dealer. And that I thought that the conversation about legalization was very reminiscent, in my view, of Vermont's history with civil unionism over marriage equality, except it was being pioneered in other states, which is fine with me, Washington State, Colorado. And that obviously, when we passed civil unions, most people thought that allowing marriage equality of any kind was unthinkable. Pretty tough conversation here in Vermont, that just 12 years later, the conversation moved very quickly because of the grassroots organizing, because families told logical stories about why they should be allowed to marry, even when they were same-sex couples and so forth. So I kind of recounted that history for them and said that I thought that going forward in the next decade, you're going to see the same kind of evolution in marijuana policy that this country's seen in marriage. So there's nothing that you couldn't have thought of on your own, but I sort of told them about a Vermont story.
That's quite a comparison. Do you think that Vermonters and Americans have the fundamental right to smoke pot the way you probably would have argued about civil unions and gay marriage? Or?
That is not what I said. It might surprise you to hear that.
Their stated goal for that call was to strategize a 50-state strategy to legalize marijuana. Is that a goal? Do you share their goal, the goal of that call?
I just want to be clear, that goal never came up in the call. We didn't discuss it.
Okay. Any reason reporters weren't allowed on the call?
My suspicion is that reporters aren't allowed on most calls.
If Vermont moves to marijuana legalization and some kind of a regulation and tax system or whatever, in a lot of realms there's a parallel structure where you have, you can go to a garden store now and buy any kind of plant and pay sales tax on plant, or you can plant a seed in your own garden at home and grow it on your own, and you kind of have it outside the government's regulation, taxation, and so on. Could you imagine a situation where Vermonters could either, buy their marijuana at Yankee Spirits or grow something for themselves at home, or you could think about beer bought at the store versus home brewing or something like that. There are these kind of parallel tracks here. A lot of people are salivating over the revenue potential of taxing marijuana, and I'm wondering
your
if
imagination certainly giving it some thought. And I should be really clear about something.
Sure.
If I took all the minutes in the last 3 weeks that I've spoken to the press about marijuana policy, with the exception of the phone call I just had, which lasted about 12 minutes, it would equate to almost the total time that I have devoted to this subject as governor in the last 6 months. So let me be clear. I have no interest in legalizing marijuana in Vermont in the next legislative session. None whatsoever. I do not believe Vermont is ready or that it would pass. What I do believe is that in the next decade, we're going to see an evolution on this, that we are blessed by the fact that Colorado and Washington takes on this one. I wish Governor Hooper, my good friend, who are helping out with the floods right now, and Governor Jay Inslee, my good friend out in Washington State, all, and I invite them to be my guests and being pioneers for us.
Let's change the
I
subject.
look forward to being back.
You also met today with Ann Braden from Gun Sense Vermont, whose opinion you do not share about gun regulations. From her that probably not changed her mind, but that caused you to think about the issue of gun violence in Vermont any differently.
No, we had a great meeting. I really do feel as governor that my job is to listen and meet with everybody that has a strong point of view about something. I applaud the work she's doing, but the most significant watershed movement on my part in terms of doing smart policy, which I've described to all of you so many times that I bet you don't like.
Your administration announced yesterday that people won't actually be able to begin buying their insurance on Vermont Health Connect on October 1st. That's been pushed back. Is any concerns about what that news will do to public confidence as we get closer to this new world?
I was amazed that we could make a headline out of that. The fact of the matter is that that's enough for it. All we had said is that you have to wait till November 1st to be able to pay electronically for insurance that you're not going to have till January 1st. Now, raise your hand in this room if you paid for your health insurance 3 months before the policy goes into effect. I don't think there's very many Vermonters that are going to be eager to pay for insurance on October 1st. If they won't have to go into effect till January 1st. If they wish to, you might give them a 101 in accounting because they could use that money in other ways.
Right. I think the news was because people have been told that they would be able to begin buying insurance on October 1st, and have been told that everything is on track, we're good to go, and that now we find out that, in fact, we won't be able to do this thing that we had said we would be able to do, which is
no one
to
wants
buy
to do.
insurance. So
Yeah,
there is.
I'm not trying to.
No, I get it.
I'm just really serious. This is not an issue. There are going to be hiccups. There are going to be bumps in the road. I told you that right from the beginning. This is not just me, but the other governors who are implementing these changes are taking on something that, in terms of technology, is going to be one of the great developments in terms of healthcare delivery. I mean, this is tough stuff. So there will be bumps in the road, but not being able to pay electronically for something that you're not going to buy anyway is not a bump in the road.
But don't you think that people might fear that this is symptomatic of some underlying readiness issues? That
we are here to tell you, as I've said many, many times, there are going to be hiccups, there are going to be bumps in the road, there are going to be things that don't work exactly as we wish them to on October 1st. We will go in and fix them when they happen. There isn't an exchange in the country that isn't going to have that. So get ready. If you're sitting around waiting to write headlines about bumps in the road, you're going to have lots of material.
What other?
You can't make a technological transformation like this without having a challenge.
I mean, do you think that some businesses that are facing this might find that to be an unsettling comment?
Well, when you transform the whole way that you purchase health insurance in your nation, and you bring on millions and millions of uninsured people who've never had insurance and now have an opportunity to have insurance, and you're matching income levels on an individual basis on a website with eligibility, tying together state information with federal information, employer information, we all know that this is a big challenge. And all I'm saying is I'm incredibly proud of the fact that Vermont is ready. We're going to have an exchange up and running on October 1st. It won't be without some challenges. We'll fix them when they come up. But if it's going to be a headline that there are going to be surprises, challenges, bumps in the road, yeah, you're going to have a lot of material. There definitely will be things that you need to be fixed. We'll fix them.
What other bumps in the road should our headline writers be ready for?
If I knew that, we wouldn't have the bumps in the road.
You've got no intel on specific parts of the exchange.
No, it's going great. It's going great.
There's nothing
right now, we're testing the system all the time, literally, every few hours. And as with any test of something new, 99% of it works great. 1% of it doesn't, and we go in and fix the 1%, whatever that percentage is. But all I'm saying is, this is a really new way of delivering healthcare. Now, as you know, it's not perfect. President Obama doesn't believe it's perfect. We don't believe it's perfect. It's much better than the system we had. That's going to bring down lots of money for Vermont to help people who are struggling to pay for health insurance. But this is a real transformation in the way we've done things. You've got to expect there's going to be good days and bad days, happy and sad. It's going to work.
Well, a big challenge, a real transformation, and an awful lot of energy is going into this effort right now, and will in the coming months. And so some of us, I think, were surprised to hear you talking about the possible payroll tax and how we're going to pay for the 2017 transformation to a universal publicly financed healthcare system. Right now, is there anything strategic behind that timing for you to kind of come out publicly on those issues now? Because earlier on, I thought we heard we weren't really going to get there until 2015, but lately you've been talking about it, and we've been sort of what's up with that?
Well, I think, in fairness to criticizing myself, which is always hard to do for all of us, I think in fairness, I have been a broken record on the fact that Vermont needs to have a single-payer, sensible, publicly financed healthcare system in place on January 1st, 2017. If I thought that the federal exchange would have solved all our problems, we wouldn't be working so hard to get to the next stage. The challenge we have in Vermont with healthcare is this simple. If we continue to spend money the way we are right now, and have for the last decade, we will all go bankrupt. We can't afford to have 2, 3, 4, 500% increases above inflation in healthcare spending in terms of our insurance premiums every single year. We just can't do it. So, as you know, the Vermont Healthcare Board is working really hard with our providers, and they've been extraordinary. We're making real progress there, to move from a system that reimburses providers for quantity of care and moving to one that reimburses for quality of care, per patient reimbursement instead of fee for service. As they do that, we need to have in place a fair financing system that allows you to have health insurance in Vermont as a privilege of living in a Green Mountain state, not who you work for, whether you kept your job, all the other ways that it works. So when we talk about a new way of paying for it, I want to be clear, make this very clear, and I want to be clear again. It's not going to be all that different from the current system, except that we're all going to pay according to our ability to pay, instead of the current system, where you can choose to pay. If you choose not to pay, someone else pays for you.
Right, but in terms of actually coming out and starting to talk more specifically about a payroll tax in August, September of 2013, when you're within weeks of launching the Vermont Health Connect system, I'm just wondering if there's anything. Are you doing that with any purpose in mind, or are you just answering some of these questions?
No, I'm doing that with a purpose in mind. The purpose is that that obviously we focused on getting the exchange out of line. We kind of feel like we got that under control, and there aren't any bumps in the road, but we've done the major work on that. We've obviously now up and running and educating Vermonters about the choices, trying to get them to go to Vermont Health Connect by October 1st, start shopping for plans and plugging into the federal bill. But at the same time, we have a very ambitious agenda in moving to a more sensible, affordable, universal healthcare system in Vermont. And I'm not going to let the pedal off the metal in order to get us there. We've got to keep focusing on that. That's going to mean the legislature joining me this winter in really looking at the current system. Who's paying now? How fair is that system? Understanding where the money comes from. And, this is complicated stuff. And then talking about how we can start moving to a system that's more sensible.
What specifically do you need the legislature to do in 2014?
Do some heavy lifting and heavy thinking with us.
Do you want committee hearings dedicated to the issue of single-payer financing?
I would love to see the legislature, I know that the Speaker and President Pro Tem agree with me on this, starting to dissect the current funding system, understand it better, so that we can build it fairly.
What are your plans for the upcoming China trip? How are you going to spend your days? And obviously, you were critical of Governor Douglas's 2010 trip. How is yours different? Why is this not something that is equally open to criticism.
Well, let me just back up for a minute. I don't recall being critical of any particular trip that Governor Douglas made. He did a good job as governor trying to grow
He
jobs.
should be worrying about Vermont jobs and not exporting them to overseas.
I don't think that's what I said. I think what I said was that in my administration, we're going to focus on trying to grow Vermont's existing jobs here, which we're doing, making real progress, and doing everything we can to make sure that we are giving the love and attention to our existing companies instead of a thought, and I'm not suggesting this is what Governor Douglas did, but a thought that, well, a company that didn't exist is going to move here. I also have always been very supportive of the EB-5 program. The notion that we can bring out-of-state capital, out-of-country capital to Vermont jobs creators, that's a good thing. So I don't think there's any disagreement with myself and Governor Douglas on our economic policy in that regard. What I intend to do in this trip is to do everything I can to help promote Vermont's EB-5 program in hopes that we can end up creating thousands and thousands of jobs up in the Northeast Kingdom, which is the part of the state that's always had our highest unemployment rates. Let's be honest, the Kingdom kids often have to leave Vermont to make a living, or leave kids to be able to make a living in the Kingdom. So, a very aggressive schedule, moving China and Vietnam, meetings, multiple meetings every day, meeting with future EB-5 investors, I will be talking about Vermont, great workforce, great place to grow jobs, great opportunities, and of course, Bill Stinger and his team will be talking about their specific projects and how those might make sense for the investors that they're talking to. I will not be promoting those projects because I'm prohibited to by SEC regulation, and that wouldn't be my appropriate role anyway. I will be talking about Vermont as a great place to do business.
Why is it okay for a private company like JP to pay your way over to China when its owner, Bill Stenger, is given to your campaign and that company has a lot of business with the state? Why is that all right?
Well, let me ask this question differently. Would it be all right to ask taxpayers to pay for my trip? And I felt when I came in as governor that when it came to promoting EB-5, not just for me, but for all the other people in state government that make trips on behalf of EB-5. The secretary is with me, as you know. We have people in the department who do nothing but EB-5. They travel constantly. I thought it was wrong to ask Vermont taxpayers to pick up that cost when there's a benefit to the entrepreneurs that are promoting the program. There's obviously a benefit to Vermont, too. We create jobs. We want jobs. It's great for all of us. But in a case where it also promotes the product of a particular entrepreneur, I felt like that entrepreneur and the investors should pick up the tab. So my first year in office, we passed a statute that was approved by the legislature and signed into law by me that said when EB-5 programs are promoted by the state of Vermont, that the investors shall pay a percentage of their $500,000 to a fund that will help fund those trips. And that's exactly what's happening here. Now, in this particular case, technically, JP advances the money. They eventually, as I understand it, will get most of that paid back by the investors as they want.
So would you travel abroad for any old company that asked you, or what's the threshold to get you on, out there raising money for a private corporation?
To get me to spend 9 days outside of Vermont, 19 flights, 9 days, getting up early and going to bed late, and standing in mostly American hotels, trying to encourage investors to invest here. You got to have a case to be made. I wouldn't do it for anyone. But I will do it for anyone that says in their plans to create a couple thousand permanent jobs, 10,000 ancillary jobs in the Northeast Kingdom or any other part of Vermont that's struggling for jobs.
A couple thousand jobs threshold then to get you
Well,
out.
I wouldn't say a couple thousand. No, I would travel for less than a couple thousand.
Okay.
I'm delighted to be traveling for 10,000 in this case.
Okay.
The EB-5 program, the way I understand it is that a
You
major
see what
part
you're in for now? Oh,
a major part of the
It's not
incentive
too late to quit.
a major part of the incentive for the Chinese investors and other foreign investors in this is just to get the green card for them or their kids.
Well,
And meanwhile, you have 1,500 Mexican farm workers on dairy farms in Vermont living in the shadows who don't have $500,000 to spend on a green card. Is this a fair world? I mean, is it philosophically, are you okay with that picture?
You know, if you're asking me whether America's immigration policy makes any sense at all, the answer is no. And the fact that we have an immigration policy that really requires our dairy farms and others, in order to get their product to market, to bring on guest workers who are not legal, makes no sense at all. So the answer to your question is no. Is our immigration policy fair in this country? Absolutely not. But does the EB-5 program allow us to bring capital into Vermont to grow jobs and economic opportunities that we otherwise would not have had? Yes, it does, and I'm going to harness every single one of those dollars that we can. Now, here's the good news. Vermont right now is getting about 20% of, as I understand it, of all the EB-5 dollars in America. That's a big deal for the state. I want to see us go to 30%. And that capital is hugely helpful to us as we grow economic opportunities.
What was your reaction when the German window manufacturer pulled out then?
Well, you know, as you know, these EB-5 projects have very strict criteria. And one of the things that I'm proud of as the governor of Vermont, I know Senator Leahy and our congressional delegation are proud of this as big supporters of the EB-5 program in Congress, is that, you know, we've never missed. We've never made promises that we couldn't keep. And one of the promises is, as you know, you've got to create 10 jobs for every $500,000 investment, putting it in rough terms. And I might not have that exactly correct. It's just ancillary jobs and permanent. But the point is, there's the jobs threshold. What happened with that particular manufacturer of windows is they started describing in more detail, and I think evolving their plans to bring in machines from Europe that were going to mechanize the process, and therefore were going to be qualified for EB-5 funding. So I think the team did the right thing and said, hey, you know, we play by the rules, this isn't going to work.
So you'll travel to China to bring in a whole lot of jobs to Vermont.
And Vietnam.
You'll support bringing F-35 planes to South Burlington to bring a whole lot of jobs to Vermont. There's a proposal on the table to build a intercontinental ballistic missile interceptor facility in Jericho at Camp Ethan. It would probably bring a lot more jobs than either of those two things. And we're talking about $1 billion to $5 billion project. But within hours of it being announced, you came out against that. What's the rationale there? What about that base really didn't appeal to you?
You know, I took my cue from our congressional delegation on that one for the simple reason that I don't do the Pentagon budget. I don't really understand or have an opportunity to take testimony on the nuances of that particular defense system. When someone like Senator Leahy, Senator Sanders, and Congress Wells say, this thing is a boondoggle, it's never going to work, and it makes no sense, I take their advice. So they're good enough to defer to me on some things that affect the decisions the governors make that I don't ask for their input. I don't really, I would never dream of second guessing them on their judgment. I looked at their response and I said, you know, best congressional delegation in America, they're always right, I'm standing with them.
Do you support legislation to require employers to give paid sick days?
You know, I've been a long-time supporter of paid family leave. One of the things that our workforce is struggling with is when you have a sick child or a sick family member, being able to give them the care that they deserve. As you know, there's a legislative study going on right now that's looking at ways that we might push this issue forward. I understand there's a press conference today on the issue. I've always been a big supporter. The challenge always is, you know, how do you pay for it? How do you make it work? Most of our employers want to see people be able to be with their families when they're sick. And you know, I think the question is, how do we make it work for employees and employers? And that's always been the challenge.
What makes it not work?
What makes it not work?
Yeah.
Where we always get hung up is how do you pay for it? How do you pay for it? And that's an area where I'm looking forward to having conversations with the legislature, with employers about how can we advance this issue.
So when the bill was brought up in the last session, you said it went too far, but do you still think it's too extreme to give workers 7 days of paid sick leave?
Did I say that?
You said it went too far.
They never passed the bill.
No, but you said it went too far. Language was went too far.
I'm sorry, I'm having I don't remember that bill. We can't remember the story. It hasn't come up. What I can tell you is that our employers wish that they had a way to take care of employees who want to take care of a sick child. child or a sick family. Our employer or employees wish they could figure something out. We ought to put our heads together and figure something out that makes sense.
The Q Squares program has been sanctioned for the third time, a year in a row, and GCF is saying it's probably going to take them 3 to 5 years to really get their error rates down. Do you think that's acceptable? Is there something the state can do in the meantime? I mean, can the state be affording to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in fees? And should the people who have been given too much in terms of their benefit, they're being asked to repay that? That's fair. Is there something the state can do?
Well, you know, we always want things to run smoothly. And I know the Secretary overseeing the entire agency is trying to make that program work. There are two challenges there. The first is, as you know, as they've explained, there was a real reduction in the employment force at the same time state workers that were running the program, at the same time that we exponentially increased eligibility, which is a good thing. We're getting more food to food insecure Vermonters. So that coalescing of those two issues made it tough from an administrative standpoint. We're working hard to try to straighten it out. As you know, we've been hiring there, and you know, I'm confident that we'll get better results in the future.
Governor, I've been asking since last Thursday for some pretty basic information about a fundraiser you took part in New York City with Bill Clinton. I've asked your staff, I've asked DJ, I've asked you. Well, there are several questions. There are several questions you were not able to answer, such as how much it costs to go to the fundraiser, how much it raised, where that money will go to, whether it's to the McAuliffe campaign or to DGA coffers in general. Do you have any more? Do you have those answers now, or is there any chance that I'll ever hear back from the appropriate people?
I got to be, you know, as you know, I don't handle that part of DGA.
Mm-hmm.
I show up and I give my speech. In this case, I had the opportunity to introduce President Clinton to Gavin. I love President Clinton. It's a great honor for me to be able to do it. And then I had dinner with my daughter in New York, who I love dearly. That was the best part of my trip. And I flew home. I don't know who paid what, where the money goes, and you've got to talk to the DGA about that.
So it's a no. I probably won't get answers to that. No.
It's between you and the DGA. I'm not, you know, I've got a lot of things to do in my day. This really isn't at the top level of concern to me.
Sure, that's understandable. Last press conference, though, you did say that you were in charge of the DGA. You run them; they don't run you. Is that?
There's a difference between me running them and me micromanaging. I just don't care. I don't get into the weeds on this. So you really got to work it out with them. I know that you and the DGA have had a difficult relationship at times. And, I hope that it gets better.
So too.
But you care about how much money they raise at that dinner, right? And that's something as chair that you want to impact on.
Well, you know, let me be clear about what my role is at DGA as chair. I don't get into the weeds on how much they raise for the gathering. I don't go to a lot of them. I can't. They do a lot of work that I'm not involved with. As chair, I help set policy. I try to guide the organization with a few little bit of time that I put into it. When you become a chair of DGA or RGA or NGA, you don't sit there and put in hours and hours of work. The governor still to be governor. Our top priority is governing our state. So they understand they've got an infrastructure that runs without you, and that's what they do.
Well, you do sit down with their donors. I mean, you know, people who have business with the state, people who pay DGA $100,000 to attend these conferences, you sit down with their donors to discuss state business. Is that correct? That was my understanding.
Occasionally we do, but it really isn't a big part of what I do at DGA. I mean, I know that you wrote your piece, to be fair, on that Saturday. If I'd known what the question was trying to get at, I would have answered it. You asked, you obviously thought that I was having meetings that weren't recorded or whatever. I told you every single meeting I went to, I should say my chief of staff did. If you'd asked me, I would have told you what I did. I got in my car, I went to Putney, I went running around my farm, I saw my parents, I got a break. I went to Green Mountain Orchards, got some apples, met my Appleville and friends. Came back to Manchester at 5 or 6 for a 6 o'clock farewell address, gave my farewell address, and came back to East Montpelier. I wasn't meeting with donors, I wasn't meeting with anyone.
I would love to have gotten those answers.
If you'd asked me, you never told me what you were looking for.
What factors are you
considering
considering
the
the Supreme Court?
Who you meet with? I thought I answered the question. I said Liz did. And then when I read the article, it was clear to me that you thought I continued to meet with people all day. I didn't. I cleared out in Manchester.
What factors are you weighing for your Supreme Court nomination that's upcoming? When might you have a decision?
I am weighing the same factors I always do, as you know, making a Supreme Court appointment is among the most important jobs the governor makes. They tend to outlast governors by a long shot. We certainly hope they do. And so I have interviewed candidates, and I hope to be able to make an announcement tomorrow.
Good. I have to stop the show at 3:30.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks.